Good morning, everybody. Happy 2025. Welcome on into the show. I'm your host, Bull Muscle. Got ourselves a little consultation here. So, I got a question. Dear Bull Muscle, good morning. I wondered if America can have a passenger train system like Amtrak that goes within the states, like Knoxville to Nashville. Pretty simple question. He didn't really want to elaborate, so we'll get into this. Let's talk a little bit about this question. First off, America already does have a train system that goes within states like Amtrak. That is Amtrak. Now, it just doesn't happen to go to the two cities you have explained here. A lot of that is due to state-by-state funding. For instance, there is a railroad system, part of Amtrak, a railroad line that works in the state of North Carolina, and it goes from, I believe, Raleigh to Durham to Greensboro to Winston-Salem and then down to Charlotte. I think it's called the Carolina Crescent or something like that. Right? That is partially run by state funding. So you can run Amtrak lines in between states. Another great example is Amtrak offers the Keystone service, which goes from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh and connects a bunch of towns in between. Another example is Amtrak runs the Empire service, which goes from New York City to Albany in New York State. There are other ones. There are Amtrak lines that go from Chicago to St. Louis. And yes, while I understand St. Louis is not in Illinois, 99% of that route is in Illinois, right? To get from Chicago to St. Louis, it must go through the entire state of Illinois. So in effect, it services Chicago to St. Louis, but all the towns in Illinois in between. So the answer is it possible for Amtrak to build a service that goes from within the states, like Knoxville to Nashville? The answer is yes. Can we have that? Absolutely. Does it make financial sense to do so? This is the different argument. The problem we have here is that rail in this country cannot be economically competitive as the current system is constructed. The reason for this is that for every dollar we spend on rail from the government, be it federal, state, local, or otherwise, we spend dozens to hundreds of dollars, depending on which state and which locality, on cars and highways and roads and bridges. And because we've built out so much in the way of car infrastructure on the taxpayer dime since the 1950s primarily, thanks to the Interstate Highways Act of 1956 and its consequences. If you didn't see me saying that at least once under this stream, you don't know this channel very well. But we have so deeply subsidized car infrastructure at this point that most Americans think of rail infrastructure, it's an afterthought to them. So you could run that line between Knoxville and Nashville. It might even make financial sense to do so because those cities are a fair amount away, and you could probably run the majority of it in the middle of the track or the land used by, I believe it's Interstate 40 that goes in between those two cities in Tennessee. You could even run it all the way to Memphis, which frankly, I think Memphis to Nashville, one being a less mountainous part of the state, and two being two larger population centers, might be a better option in terms of a rail connection. Frankly, I think that the state of Tennessee would be well benefited to do something very similar to what the state of North Carolina is doing and run a subsidized rail system between its big cities. Again, the same way that North Carolina does from Charlotte to Raleigh. Now, all that being said, does it make sense to do that with Amtrak? At present, I say the answer is no. The reason being that Amtrak has fundamental problems that it is unable to fix. The biggest one is that the federal government refuses to enforce laws that are already on the books that tell the big four freight rail companies they need to give priority to Amtrak trains. Due to freight rail embracing precision scheduled railroading and making their trains a lot longer, it's a lot harder for Amtrak trains to get through a lot of the single tracked parts of the US rail network, which has been underfunded and underinvested by the big four rail companies for decades. Unfortunately, I don't see the federal government enforcing that rule or the FRA enforcing that rule anytime soon. Should they? I would say yes. Why have a law on the books if you're not going to enforce it? Either get rid of the law or enforce the law. It's very simple. This is why I'm not really a huge fan of, for instance, just decriminalizing cannabis. Just remove the law that makes it illegal. Yes, CN, of course, plays a factor, but CN is most of their dealings are, I believe, in Canada, right? They're Canadian rail. But yes, they've got much bigger play in the northern half of this country. But you get the point. When I'm saying the big four, right, just the Class 1 railroads in general. Yes, CN is absolutely an offender, just like Norfolk Southern or BNSF or UP or CSX. Absolutely. But the point here is that until you fix that, right, Amtrak's longer distance trains on rail networks it doesn't own, which is basically everything outside of that Northeast corridor from Boston to DC, will get delayed by freight trains. If you have ever ridden Amtrak anywhere outside of the Acela line, you know exactly what this is. So there are two ways to do this. Well, you can fund Amtrak enough to where Amtrak can either build, which they shouldn't do because it would be catastrophically expensive, or buy, which you can make a better argument for, rail infrastructure to actually build out their network. Frankly, if you're going to make a national rail company the same way, say, Germany has with DB, the UK used to have with British Rail, or some sort of public-private hybrid like the Japanese have with JR, first off, you need to drastically cut the amount of subsidies we give to highway infrastructure. It's very simple. There's only a fixed amount of money. We are already spending in tremendous amounts of federal deficit every year. So if you're going to start spending more from the federal government somewhere, you need to cut somewhere else. And I'm personally much more on the libertarian side of this because I think it's better if the government just doesn't pick sides and spends the least amount of money, because the government doesn't do anything efficiently. If you're surprised that I'm saying that, even though I'm pro-rail on paper, consider the state where I live. Okay, we have the country's worst rail project here, and it's not even close. The Honolulu skyline makes California high-speed rail look like a well-run project, okay? It's so bad. It's so bad that at this point, 16 years into building this thing, we're now in 2025, 16 years into building this thing, there are 9 open stations for the Honolulu skyline. 0 of them are within Honolulu city limits. Until 2031, 2 will be open within Honolulu city limits. The next 4 stations that are opening are at Pearl Harbor, which, okay, good, that's a useful station. The airport, good, useful station. But neither of those really have any actual people living near them. They're destinations. Mapunapuna, which, okay, that is actually useful. There's going to be people around that area that will use the rail. And then Kalihi, again, useful station, definitely going to be useful. But right now, the Hart is saying that they're not going to open those next 4 stations until late 2025. I'm calling bullshit on that. I think it won't be until 2026. And it's a pity, because if they opened it a little bit sooner, I would strongly consider moving to a place like Kalihi and actually using the rail to transit every day. But at present, no. Why? The rail doesn't go anywhere. It starts in a field, literally a fucking farming field, in East Kapolei. I say East Kapolei very generously because it's not connected to downtown Kapolei. It's also not connected to all the residential areas of Ewa Beach. It's like in the middle where there's nothing. It goes through an empty field at UH West Oahu. It goes at an empty field at Honolulu. It goes through 2 actually decent stations that require more infill, honestly, in Waipahu. It has a depot station for a community college, and most of the catchment zone is the interstate mixing bowl between H1, H2, and Kamehameha, so that one's not helpful. The Pearl City one would be good, except for that you have to cross a strode just to get to the station, instead of building, a walkway across, which is really sad considering there are 2 massive towers right next to it at Pearl City. The Kalawao station at Aiea, not a bad place to put it, but you get outside of that station and you see a bunch of completely unused land. Why has this not been developed into higher density housing yet? You can't sit here and tell me there isn't demand for it. This is the most expensive real estate location in the country, barring a couple parts of San Francisco and New York. So, right, Hawaii Rail rant aside for a moment, the point is the United States government is not good at spending its money efficiently. State governments are not good at spending their money efficiently. Again, if you want to use an example that isn't the rail here, go look at what California is having to deal with for its high-speed rail system. And should California build the HSR? Different question. Have they done it well? The answer is almost clearly objectively no at this point. Just tremendous cost overruns, tremendous delays, and lots of NIMBYism getting in the way. But with regards to building out an Amtrak network, to me, the clear answer is that the best option Amtrak has to work with are its existing rail lines that can be run relatively profitably or for a minimal loss. So what's that going to be? That's going to be improving infrastructure along the Acela, because the Acela actually makes sense to run. It's faster than almost everything else in the US. Amtrak actually owns the rail lines, so they can actually make improvements. If they were looking to expand, I would personally make the first step buying out lines, maybe working with VRE in Virginia to connect up, to buy the line between Richmond and DC. If you do that, you connect Richmond, Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, and all those areas where you could maybe start getting a few hypercommuters or remote workers who want to live in Richmond and commute to DC once, maybe twice a week, saving a ton on rent, because DC is a lot more expensive to live in than Richmond is. Then from Richmond, you connect up to the North Carolina lines, because that one you may actually want to build, because really there isn't that much in the way of freight rail between those two cities, and land is relatively cheap. The Great Dismal Swamp doesn't have a lot in it. That chunk of North Carolina is relatively low population. So you could probably run fresh line, and you don't have to build it to high-speed rail standards. You don't have to elevate it. Build it to 120-mile rail standards, right? Higher speed rail. I believe the state of Ohio is talking about doing this with their 3 Cs and a D project, which is Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Dayton. That's a really good rail line project. In the same way, to answer your question, yes, you could do Knoxville and Nashville. The trouble with that is it's going to require state support. And Tennessee is a strongly Republican state. Tennessee does not have any holdings tied into the oil and gas industry, though. So you may find that support for a rail project like that might work. Again, North Carolina is also purple, but reddish purple. Typically, North Carolina is a Republican state. So if North Carolina has appetite for it, perhaps Tennessee can take a look at North Carolina, see what they've done right, see what they haven't done right, and try to model their program off of that, or try to model the successful parts of that program while changing parts that aren't successful. The other one I would recommend for long distance stuff that Amtrak do is start doing overnight trains. Overnight trains you can run, yeah, you'll need cars that have beds in them, but build enough of them, right? If you do an overnight train where people can sleep and get to their destination in the morning, they're not going to care as much that it takes 8 hours instead of 2, right? A good example is this new Borealis line that they're running from Chicago to Minneapolis. You could do that as an overnight train. You did that as an overnight train, right? By the time you've gotten through all the bullshit of flying, or the bullshit of driving, if it's driving, you've spent the same amount of time. Near as makes no difference. If you're flying, it's more expensive, carbon emissions are higher if you care about that, and it's just unpleasant. Flying is just awful. U.S. government spending is like California's high-speed rail. That guy over there, you don't need to tell me about this. Consider where I live. Yes. But if Tennessee would like to do a rail project between, I would say, Memphis and Nashville, and then to Knoxville afterwards, I think that's a worthwhile use of money, but it's got to be done at the state level. I think, especially with the Trump administration coming in, the idea that it's going to happen at the federal level is no. If Kamala had been elected, maybe, but even then, if Kamala had been elected, it would take a long time and probably be horrendously wasteful and inefficient. We need to privatize rail if we ever want it to succeed. Here's my problem with that. I'm all for privatizing rail on paper, much like I'm all for a more nationalized European or Japanese style rail system on paper. Either would be better than the status quo. The trouble with privatized rail is that nobody wants to do that with the highways. You have to compete apples to apples. If you subsidize the shit out of highways, which we do to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars every year at the taxpayer dime, and then you expect rail to compete, well, the rail has to charge something because they have to, make enough money to survive. If the highways don't have to charge anything, don't be shocked when everybody uses the highway. So if you're looking for private passenger rail, keep an eye on Brightline. I do like what Brightline has been doing in Florida. California to Vegas, I get why they're doing Brightline West. I think that's dumb. I think if Brightline really went all in on Florida, connected like Jacksonville, and then started working towards Atlanta, building in the Southeast, you could really start seeing a lot more synergies within the network, right? So Brightline as constructed, I believe they're going to open up to Tampa pretty soon. So it's going to go from Tampa to Miami. Well, that's great, but you've got a lot of other towns in Florida, cities in Florida that are probably worth connecting to. And every one you connect to, you gain another pairing, right? So let's say you connect to Gainesville, right? Well, not only have you connected Gainesville to Orlando, but you've got Gainesville to Tampa. You've got Gainesville to Boca Raton, Gainesville to Miami. You do the same thing with Jacksonville, and it builds on itself. The thing with Brightline is Brightline's been very clever about their money aspect of this. The rail itself for Brightline doesn't make a ton of money. What they do is make money with the real estate partnerships around the rail stations where people want to live. They're building luxury apartments and condos there. And because of the housing shortage, there's a lot of demand for that. I would love to see Brightline be a lot more aggressive about expansion in Florida. Florida is cheaper to build in than California and Nevada. It's flat as a pancake, which means it's easier to build in than California and Nevada. I hope Brightline West goes well. I feel like it's going to be what shoots Brightline in the foot. I want it to go well. I do. But it's a lot more difficult to build from LA to Vegas than it is from anywhere in Florida to anywhere in Florida, just because of geography. Florida is flatter than Kansas. It's about the flattest state in the union. Flat equals easy to build rail. Simple as. Oh, they still haven't built to Tampa? Okay, well, the point remains. If I was Brightline, I would be going all in on Florida. Because again, Florida doesn't have as many people as California does, but Florida has a lot more people closer together than California. Yes, is the Bay Area a massive metro area and LA a massive metro area? Totally. LA is bigger than any city in Florida by a country mile. However, LA is hemmed in by its geography. You have to blast through the San Gabriel Mountains if you want to go north or run the track at a grade. Or if you want to go south, you have to go through some of the most expensive land in the country, and that's only just to get to San Diego, which I will say already exists as an Amtrak line. So if you're gonna look at expanding, personally, if I were running Brightline, I would go all in on Florida. You could do so much more. I mean, just thinking alone, right? Connect up Tampa, Gainesville, Ocala, Jacksonville. You've now connected the vast majority, basically everything but the Panhandle. Florida's what, 20 million people? So you've got, let's just say, you subtract the Panhandle, I think it's like 10%, 18 million people as a base to work with. That's as much as New York plus Boston plus Philadelphia, I think. That's a pretty good combo. I just don't see the value in going and connecting a completely Brightline West, right? Brightline West is only going to make sense because it's only connecting into Rancho Cucamonga. So it's not even connecting to downtown LA. Yes, is it nice to be able to go up to Vegas and back? Sure. But that's it. Like there's no future where you're really expanding the same way you can expand to different cities in Florida, right? With Brightline West, really, you got to hope and pray that California actually builds the high-speed rail project. So that way, riders from the Central Valley or riders from the Bay Area can eventually get to LA using it. Frankly, if you were going from the Bay Area, you'd probably just drive or fly just because the rail line there would be, you'd have to swoop through the Central Valley and then go up into Nevada. Probably not going to happen. Texas missed another game winning. Oh, yeah, you're watching the Texas game. You can guarantee I won't be doing that. Literally, I can think of so many better things I could be doing with my time, and I plan to be doing that. This makes me want to watch you play Railroad Tycoon. Maybe I'll do that later today. That actually sounds like some fun. But yeah, if I were a private company, that guy over there, I can make the argument for privatized rail. But if you are going to advocate for privatized rail, you need to start being honest about our highway system. Compare apples to apples. And you can't sit here and say, oh, but the, what about freight? We need it for our truckers. We have freight rail that's private. Why can't we have freight highways that are private? In fact, that actually might mean you would get some sort of cost parity. In fact, right, rail is far more efficient at hauling goods, especially heavy goods, than trucks are. Why? Well, because steel rails on steel wheels is a far more efficient combination because it's less friction. This is a physics problem than a rubber tire on an asphalt road. Not to mention, rubber tire on an asphalt road degrades a lot faster, especially under the load of heavy 18-wheelers, than a train line does. So this is one where we, again, thanks to the Interstate Highways Act of 1956's consequences, we stabbed repeatedly the U.S. rail industry in the back over and over and over again. What you cannot do, right? It would be like, let's say, let's go with, I make books. This here's Bachelor Pad Economics, right? Let's say I'm making books and I'm selling these books for a profit. Doesn't matter what the books are, and I charge $10 a book. And then the government comes along and says, oh, we're going to make magazines. We are going to subsidize magazines at the taxpayer dollar, so that way you pay nothing, you're only taxed 50 cents for it. Well, then don't be shocked when the book company goes out of business. You can't compete with the federal government when it comes to resources, right? It's very simple. If you want to privatize things, and I can very much make the libertarian argument for it, you don't have to convince me that public projects can be a fucking boondoggle. If you're going to privatize things, this is the difference, I think, between Republicans and libertarians, and why I would consider myself more of a centrist than anything, but if you had to pin me economically speaking, I'm definitely more in the line of libertarian. It's intellectual consistency. You cannot sit here and tell me we need to privatize rail, and then turn around and say, no, we need to build more roads and more bridges and more lanes at the taxpayer expense. What you're saying there is, I want government to pick winners and losers. And that's my biggest problem, not to get political, with the Republican Party right now. The Republican Party used to, at least on theory, stand in favor of the free market, and it doesn't anymore. And Donald Trump is a big reason why. Nowadays, the Republican Party stands for, we like the government picking winners and losers just like the Democrats do. We just have different winners and losers that we want to pick, right? The Democrats want to subsidize rail and have people use public transit. So they pick the winner and loser there, right? The Republicans want to subsidize cars and subsidize highways and subsidize suburbs. They're just picking winners and losers. Both parties are picking winners and losers. The difference is they're just picking different winners and losers. That's not helpful. We should have the government picking neither. That would be the goal. Anyway, as for the status quo, though, to answer your question, I'm rambling a bit, but to answer the question, yes, you could absolutely, I think it would be very feasible for either a public or a public-private partnership to run rail between Knoxville and Nashville. I personally think Memphis to Nashville would be a much better start because Memphis is a bigger city than Knoxville, and because it's flatter land between the two. Ultimately, I think if you ran a line between all three states, you would do very well. Even better would be if you could somehow connect it through the Appalachians to Winston-Salem, therefore getting connection between the North Carolina rail system and a proposed Tennessee rail system. Of course, And also, in the process, getting rid of one of the most agonizing interstates in the country. Fuck Interstate 40 going from North Carolina into Tennessee. I fucking hate that highway. Always awful. It's always got problems. So if you were to run a rail system through there, that would be pretty cool. You definitely at least get rid of some of the problems on that highway. But do I think it should be done at the federal level? No, the federal government won't do it efficiently. If it has to be done at a governmental level, I think it should be done by the state of Tennessee. I think the state of Tennessee ought to consider it because Nashville is growing tremendously. Knoxville is starting to grow. And Memphis, while it isn't growing as fast, is still a large population center that, for better or for worse, would represent connecting the three main engines of the Tennessee economy. You know, and you wouldn't have to just connect those three. Looking at the state of Tennessee, if you were to draw a line between Knoxville, Nashville, and Memphis, it's kind of like an arc. You know, you could connect up in between. You could connect Cookeville. I think there's a big assembly plant or something in in Cookeville. There's a, you know, that's a growing town. Nashville, you know, you could maybe connect up Dixon in between there, or Jackson, Tennessee. You could connect a few towns along the way. You know, you could maybe make a stop in Oak Ridge. That way you pick up all the people who work at the labs out there. You wouldn't just have to run between those three. Chattanooga would kind of be out of the way, so you probably couldn't do that. But again, I would think for a large portion of the track, especially in between Nashville and Memphis where it's flatter, you could run in the median of Interstate 40. You know, you could, I think that you could see a way to do it. And again, you would not have to run it at 200 mile an hour rail speed to see it be worthwhile. Because, right, Memphis to Nashville is maybe 100 to 150 miles. So if you're running at 100 plus miles an hour, but not 150, if you can run that line the same speed that they're talking about running St. Louis to Chicago, game over. You're winning, and you're going to beat cars, and you're going to be flying. So that's what you want. Memphis hasn't been able to get out from under the textile crash. That's as may be. And yes, Memphis is one of the poorest cities in the United States, but it's still a large population hub. And if you're going to connect, right, he was talking about a rail line between Nashville and Knoxville. Nashville to Memphis is smoother track. It's smoother land. Memphis is a much bigger city than Knoxville. To me, it would make more sense to start with those two as a pairing and then go to Knoxville. So that's all I got for you guys as for this consultation. If you guys have a question, diet plans, meal plans, random rail questions, political questions, dating advice, anything like that, you know, again, how many other nuclear engineer runway models who are financially independent and have a six-pack do you know? If you want that, right up above, askbullmuscle@gmail.com. That's going to be it for me today unless I get another consultation. Okay, a few other things I want to talk about. Should have started the video with this, but I want to talk about something within the server I haven't made maybe as clear as I should have. I'm getting way too many DMs from people who I don't know, and it's very difficult to remember who is who. There's a number. What's it called? It's Duggan's number or something. Hang on. I'm gonna look this up. It's I was looking at it last night. Let's see. Search history. Dunbar's number. That's it. Dunbar's number suggests that there is a finite number of people you can actually keep a relationship and interact with, and that this number is between 100 and 200. Well, the first 20 slots are kind of filled up with family, and then another 20 are filled up with close friends that I've met in real life. Those aren't changing. Then another probably 5 to 10 are people I know here. So drop 50 from that. You're looking at 100 to 150 people. My Discord server, I had 384 friends on there. So that's an obvious, okay, this isn't working problem. I've also had people, again, just blowing up my DMs with the same, hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? How's your day going? Hi, how are you? How's your day going? I had a rule about this in my server. Is basically, if that's what you're asking, if you just want kind of generic breaking the ice kind of stuff, ask it in my server. That's why I built the server, so you have access to me. As for DMs, if you actually want to talk about something private with me, that's what my email is for. My DMs are closed. I just can't handle it anymore. It became too much of a time suck. I'm going to do the same thing to Instagram. It's just on my to-do list right now. So that's sort of where I'm at. It's, again, y'all didn't do anything wrong. I'm just trying to clarify. So the way this works is if you want to talk to me in a public space, go to my Discord server and talk in the server, right? You can ping me. That's totally fine. I have pings turned on. You can't you're not really going to have much success at DMing me. If you want something private, if you want to ask for modeling pictures, if you want a consultation, any of that, askbullmuscle@gmail.com. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense and clears up any confusion we're having. That's the route we're going for 2025. If you've got any questions, another one, you can respond to my YouTube comments. I'm pretty good about responding to most of the comments that come in on YouTube. If, I know a lot of them are just thirsty stuff, I'll still respond, try to be friendly with those. That's not really what I'm looking for here, but if you want to talk about that, go for it. As for rail's concerned, would I love to see rail take off more in the US? I would, but after living here, I can't honestly say that I trust any government, state, federal, local, or otherwise, to do rail properly. And because rail is so much more expensive, especially on the local level, I'd say forget about it. You're better off building bike paths. With the dawn of e-bikes, moving rapidly on a bicycle has never been easier. And again, I get that government can't do anything very efficiently, but at the same time, there is far less opportunity for graft, corruption, inefficiency, bureaucracy on a 12-foot wide strip of asphalt, which is what a separated bike path is, than an elevated or even street level rail line. A rail line requires electric power or a diesel locomotive, which you then have to fill with diesel power. A rail requires building, very straight rail lines, requires signaling, requires all these other things. A bike path is just 12 feet of asphalt and then just repaving it every couple of decades, right? You have to repave a bike path a lot less often than you have to repave a highway, because a bike only weighs, 15, 20, 25 pounds. At the absolute most, it weighs, let's say it's a cargo e-bike with a fat person on it, and that person's hauling a bunch of cargo, like a freight load. 500 pounds is probably the absolute most. 500 pounds is a fraction of a Mazda Miata, which does virtually no damage to an actual road. Part of the reason our roads are degrading faster and faster these days is the dawn of heavier and heavier vehicles, predominantly trucks, predominantly buses. Electric buses, again, great idea in theory. Well, they're going to be catastrophically heavy, and catastrophically heavy vehicles damage roads to a factor of 10 more than heavy vehicles like, big pickup trucks or SUVs or Hummers or Teslas, right? The Tesla is a heavy vehicle, but that does far less damage than buses and trucks, which in turn, right, a Tesla or a heavy passenger vehicle does far less or far more damage to a road than, say, a Miata or an Escort or a Mitsubishi Mirage, right? So that's basically it. Hopefully we get more consultations. If you want it, askbullmuscle@gmail.com. That is going to be it for me today until I hear otherwise. New York Fashion Week comes up in a couple weeks. I'm locking in. It's going to be all about getting my diet in correct order, getting enough sleep. This is crunch time. New York Fashion Week comes in 34 days. If I can do this right, there's no telling where the sky or where the limit is. Could be the sky. So until next time, y'all, make good decisions. Those good decisions form your habits. Those habits form your values. Those values form an ethos. You'd be the guide to start through the rough waters of life. Come in for the hug. I think I missed 10 actions, but y'all heard me say that enough times. Shoots. See y'all.